Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365, and we are back with a weather update. Greg Soulje, meteorologist with This Week in Agribusiness and with Feedstuffs 365. Welcome back, Greg. Great to have you with us.
Well, thank you, sir. Nice to be with you here on as we record this thing, the last day of January 2025. Year flying right by. Same with the month, and hopefully for most, the winter season as well is just moving at lickety spit space and pacing and across the country, and really not much to speak of so far with winter as it applies to a bunch of cattle country in the Corn Belt.
Well, we're both here in Northern Illinois, and it actually feels like spring. And I know we got a big day coming up next week, right? Groundhog Day. We gotta see what's gonna happen there. Are we still in for more winter? So we'll be talking to the expert next week, Greg. You're just filling in here. We're gonna
My colleague, the furry critter, the days of technology and model runs and all that. We're still relying on that, or a rattlesnake, or what have you these days. So, but one thing they didn't teach in weather school back in Northern Illinois University is the psychology of weather and being able to deal with the groundhog and the ups and downs and the general perception and the commentary of people at large out there. So
right,
got to go with the flow.
Especially now that social media is so big.
Oh, even more so.
Oh goodness. Well, let's add your maps in here and take it away. Tell us what's in the news, what's happening, and what's ahead.
Yeah, really, it's been rain, at least as it applies to the Corn Belt. The lack of snow cover. We'll take a look at a snow cover chart in just a second. And what snow we have had has been melting away. And then you put on top of it what's been a pretty substantial rain system over kind of a narrow corridor, the central Corn Belt, Iowa, parts of northern Illinois. While we haven't had much snow, when we've had some snow melt, the grounds are pretty well frozen. A lot of times the colleague that the gentleman I learned the weather business from, and I don't want to sound morbid here, but the way they used to monitor frost levels, at least for some of his radio station clients, through the Corn Belt and the Great Lakes area in Wisconsin, for example, would talk to the grave diggers, and they'd give you a great estimate on how deep the frost line was. So in any event, it's pretty substantial still with all the cold we've had. So you put the rain on top of that, and you have various streams and rivers that are kind of going into ice jam mode, and they will continue to go through that. We're not really in much of a cold cycle for now. And so what rain comes down, plus the snow melt, plus the warming of air temperatures, you got to keep an eye on some of these streams and rivers across sections of the Corn Belt. So that is the story on what has been a pretty anemic snow cover spell of weather. There is the midday Friday maps and charts to any significant snow. There isn't much to speak of. Parts of the northeast of New England where a few days ago they had thunder squalls, 55-mile-an-hour winds in New York State and parts of Michigan, but that now has gone to a snow melt and rain coming through there. You really see only high elevation snows across the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies, and we'll take a look at the snowpack out there. And we always take a look at the snowpack through the western states, the Sierra through California, because it is a major source of water for crops and irrigation and livestock operations when that snow melt season does get underway in the western states. Meanwhile, across the plains, that system, as we had just talked about, is leaving just plenty of bare grounds, sunshine in abundance for late January, temperatures that are running 10 to 20 degrees above average. And so you open up the can of worms. When it does get cold, can we get snow back on the ground and keep an eye on winter wheat, which is basically in a range from in relatively good shape on the southern plains to pretty anemic, where 28% of the winter wheat crop is in some sense of a drought. We'll take a look at the drought manner in just a minute. And 100% of that number is coming out of South Dakota and Nebraska. So a nice day work, not so great if you're looking for snow cover. And there is the snow cover chart from this last day of January, confined in a little nodule through northeastern Kansas, the Canadian Prairie, northern Great Lakes, the northeast of New England, and in pockets across the northern and central Rockies. And, despite the drying weather spells through California, the Sierra ranges are in relatively good shape, all things considered. And I think going forward here, we'll take a look at in just a minute and have details on this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. The extended stuff has a fair amount of moisture moving into Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. The same rain system, by the way, which is moving through the southeastern states, did leave some elevated stream and river issues through the Delta, the eastern sections of Kansas. Some of our livestock friends down there probably dealing with wet pastures, some standing water out there because of the snow melt a couple of weeks ago and the significant snows that came down there. So those grounds are well saturated. And if you're looking to get away out of the cold, and there's not much cold to speak of, looks like some 80-degree weather. You'll see that little star down there outside of Fort Myers and Tampa. They'll be up and around 80. But look at the warmth over the middle part of the country, the Corn Belt 40s and 50s. Yeah, it's great for outdoor work. Footing issues for livestock and outdoor workers a bit different. And of course, folks who monitor those grain bin and storage and confinement areas really got to keep temperatures uniform, humidity levels uniform. This kind of drives you bonkers by wintertime standards with high humidity, elevated temperatures. And if you go in the other direction, that's another can of worms that does get opened up. And there is the outlook, or at least the highlights across the western states. The Pacific Northwest, the watersheds, the water runoff potential off the Cascades, pretty good so far. We're going to add to that substantially here in the next probably 2.5 or 3 weeks. The Sierra is not so good. It looks pretty good on the visible satellite picture of the peaks, but they only had equivalent, if you were to take any snowfall, melted down, only about an inch worth of water in the higher peaks of the Sierra during January. That is abysmal. That is anemic. And we have not even 11 inches. If you were to melt down all that water, there's only 11 inches of runoff potential into the Sacramento and San Joaquin valleys, when it should be double that at this point in midwinter time. So, we're okay, but we need some work in the western states. And I think we won't be able to accomplish that, Sarah, going forward here. Days to come. And there's a quick snapshot of Sunday. We'll take a look at cloud cover versus the critter sees a shadow or doesn't, or however you want to look at it. But the western states are going to be making headlines, I think, for Sunday and going forward. Northern California, the Bay Area, some of those northern Sacramento Valley areas up through the Willamette Valley of Washington State and Rogue River Basin of Oregon. Significant rain, mountain snow out there. And meanwhile, much of the plains and Corn Belt. Do you need a car wash? You need a pickup wash? This is the weekend to do it, or get the Christmas decorations down from off the silo, because nothing but mild air relative to early February is expected across the plains and Corn Belt.
So some winter is still ahead, you think?
Yes. Matter of fact, here are the headlines for next week. And you can, that's a nice little lead there, because the northwestern part of the country, big rain, big snow, big wind, 5 to 10 inches of water equivalent. And then if you do a kind of a 10-to-1 ratio, that's 5 to 10 feet of snow for openers in the Cascades and Northern Sierra. So there's some promise there, La Nina driven, of a significant moisture there. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty quiet weather pattern regarding wintertime for now in the short term across the plains and Corn Belt. But there is sharply colder air. We're going to take a look at that, and it is repooling. The upper air pattern is configuring into a La Nina setup. We've talked about that here on TV, on radio, and on these broadcasts. It's a La Nina season. It's going to be a rapid, ramped up one. So weather should be about the same going forward here, probably for the next 2 or 3 months. There's a quick look at the leftover rain into Illinois, the eastern Corn Belt, the Mid-Atlantic region, which is some of these areas in the Mid-Atlantic region are dry for wintertime out there. And you can see the onslaught of moisture through Northern California, but the Pacific Northwest, that's the next 24 to 36 hours. So on to the weather maps and charts. Are those green spaghetti lines. And really, Sarah, the two things to point out: that low, that L into the Pacific Northwest, that is anchored out there. It'll continue to send disturbances one after another about every 12 to 18 hours for our livestock operations in Northern California. The mountains of the West, that will include, by the way, Idaho and Montana and Wyoming and the Dakotas. So for you livestock people out there, where it's been a pretty mild winter, snow cover has been next to nil, except up near the Canadian border. We will be adding to that. And you can then, if you get down to that bottom panel, if that top left is Monday, the middle bottom is Friday, you can see the flow becomes more dominant out of the Canadian Prairie, the Northwest Territories, the Canadian Rockies, and he's still got energy coming across California, the southern states, and it swirls into the northeast of New England. When you phase jet stream patterns like that, that usually means storm development. The cold air is not real deep, so you get these ranges of freezing rain, sleet, and snow on any given weather system. So the whole shebang begins to come down. If that's Monday top left, you can see the Arctic air pooling through the northern plains. You get a couple of disturbances still moving through the Corn Belt and plains. That's going to be probably rain systems between late Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, a shift over to snow late Wednesday, Thursday for the Dakotas, the upper Midwest, western parts of the Corn Belt and western Great Lakes region. And that cold air then settles and stalls onto the southern plains. So there will be moisture again for some of these wet cattle areas and pasture lands of the southern plains, Mississippi Valley and Delta region come Thursday and Friday. So it's La Nina type cold and storminess. And again, going forward, hold on good and tight. Here's the Fed's outlook for the next 6 to 10 days. We'll have, of course, our 4-week forecast on this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. That will take you, by the way, if I can see the calendar here, to the first couple of days of March. You can't find a forecast like that anywhere else if you're looking for it anywhere on the web. But at least this is the government outlook here through early February. No conjecture of wrong or right on this. It looks to be a kind of the right idea. Cold in the Pacific Northwest and those blues, warmth over the Ohio Valley and Southeast, and then out into the first 10 days or 2 weeks of February. The cold is building south and eastward, and the moisture pattern out over the first week of January, or I should say February, first week of into the second week of February, is really kind of loaded up in two areas. The West, so we get drought relief, and livestock operations really need to be ready for this shift from early spring to a dead of winter look and feel. And the Corn Belt locales, 2 cans of worms get opened up. First, we got flooding issues, streams and rivers, lowland ag areas, and then we're going to bring about colder air. Watch the livestock confinement areas, the bins as well, and footing becomes precarious for livestock and outdoor workers as well. And this will be a range of rain to freezing rain to sleet and snow from southeast to northwest across the Corn Belt into the plains. So, everything but the kitchen sink is going to begin to come down, Sarah, here in the first couple of weeks of February. Now, very tight and compacted February, March, April, winding down in May, almost a 4-month spell of a ramped up La Nina weather pattern across the country.
So is that when El Nino then that just goes away? La Nina, right?
La
one?
Nina,
I got the wrong one. Okay.
No, that's fine, because La Nina is when we cool the waters of the Pacific. El Nino is when we warm them up. And there's a direct relationship. If 78% of the planet is made up of water, there is a correlation both in the Pacific, and people tend to forget the Atlantic as well. We have entities that do long-range forecasting off the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, into the Pacific as well, and around the Arctic Circle. There's been some talk of, the atmosphere is layered. We have what we call the troposphere, runs the weather systems. Above that's called the stratosphere. And if you look at temperatures over the polar region, that's usually an indicator of, this is, again, no commentary on global warming or anything like that. We just monitor stratosphere temperatures over the polar region because when they warm, Arctic air, cold air is on the move into this particular part of North America. So that's something that's beginning to take place as well on the longer range weather maps and charts. So a couple of quick little snippets here. There's the drought monitor. We've made markable improvement over the central and southern Corn Belt. Wouldn't be surprised here that we get into the start of the planting season, which is going to be delayed. We'll tell you that right now. It is not going to be an early access in the southeastern part of the country, the Ohio Valley, and going northward from there into the Corn Belt locales. Probably better in the west and the plains, not so great in the eastern Corn Belt. That's the early snippet on the spring outlook, and we'll talk about that here as we get into the middle part of February on our broadcast. And so that's the drought monitor. And now for the giggles and laughs part of the forecast here. This is the cloud forecast for February 2nd. So I guess that's a determining factor. How does it go again? If he sees a shadow, is 6 more weeks of winter? I don't remember.
I don't even remember. We'll have to Google that. But yeah,
we'll turn the Google machine on here in the weather office and see. Anyway, I think if it's cloud cover and he doesn't see a shadow, I think that means more winter. I could be wrong.
I think you're right. Let's go with that. Yeah.
Okay.
And if he sees it means it's, I don't know. It's sunny.
So, but if you look at the calendar, there's still 6 more weeks to go anyway. So anyway, there's going to be a lot of cloud cover in the Corn Belt. There will be more sun in those blue areas. Those numbers mean smaller amounts of clouds. The higher numbers mean more in the way of sky condition being overcast. So more in the way of clouds for the southeast part of the country, the Corn Belt, eastern and southern areas, more sun in the northern and western Corn Belt, Plain States, southwestern part of the country. So there you go. I'll share my snippet, and people get upset. They can send, cards and letters to Mike Pearson or something.
We can just have them put there in the chat. See, we're challenging them.
Yeah,
if they
that's
see
right.
the shadow, what is it? If they don't see the shadow,
it always sees a shadow, whether it may be in the headlights of my
You tell
vehicle
us, guys.
each February
There
2nd.
you go.
Orion used to get me going, and that was my response to that. So that's the story about that. Send the cards and letters to Mike Pearson, the guy at the anchor desk at This Week in Agribusiness.
Critter just wants to go back to bed anyway.
All the inroads and strides we made, and we're still, dealing with vermin. Anyway, back to you, Sarah.
So is that what we got? Are we wrapped up here?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
There we go. All right. I was waiting for that last
now
slide.
we're officially done one way or another.
Very good. No, there's certainly more winter ahead. We certainly need to be aware to watch for that. Don't just assume that because it's spring-like, at least here in Northern Illinois, that we're done. So watch those livestock, watch those bins, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, we've had snippets of wintertime in the plains, but we're opening. There's just virtually nothing out there with snow cover. These temps are incredibly warm, and it's just going to be like just bottoming out again. I mean, we've had cold, and it'll be more of a longer lasting cold. And yes, we will add to the snow cover and just plan on wintertime. I hope you did not take the plow off the pickup for folks who are watching this broadcast today. You will need it going forward.
Very good. All right. Well, we'll catch up with you next week, Greg. Yep. We appreciate the update and a longer term forecast here in the middle of the month we'll have on Feedstuffs 365, and Greg will join us with that. So have a great weekend, and thank you all for joining us as well.